Yes, my name is Juan Pablo Echeverria. A little background on myself. I grew up in Guatemala. I moved to the United States about 6 years ago. I met my now wife down in Guatemala. She's an American. We we met, did long distance for a little bit. We did some back and forth traveling, and eventually she imported me to the United States. So I moved here about 6 years ago. Back home, I was already involved and interested in all subjects around agriculture and nutrition and community building. Some of the things I did were I served on the board of a public health organization that worked in the rural communities of my town. I served there for about 8 years, and kind of like one of the main programs I helped lead was a nutrition program where a lot of the communities there are obviously subsisting farmers, but one of the issues they have is that they'll grow one single crop, then they'll bring their crop to the market, they'll sell it, and then they'll bring that money back into their communities where they actually have not a lot of access to like healthy food. And so a lot of the same processed food that we see here in the United States, we have that as well. And so despite being farmers and despite having a lot of food grown around them, they tend to spend a lot of their money now in their rural communities with like a lot of processed, high caloric foods. And so our program focused on trying to teach them kind of backyard gardening, which was like an easy thing to do because they already understood a lot of the concepts. There was like a disconnect between kind of like, thinking about feeding themselves as part of their work as well. I also had an urban agriculture farm in my city. I'm from the second largest city in Guatemala, and we grew, we're able to grow year round there. And I served mostly restaurants and organic markets and, all sorts of like specialty stores, just very high quality, fresh, local produce. And I also had a bar restaurant that my hope was to eventually turn it into like a farm to table. But I got, fell in love and got brought over to the United States. And so I had to leave all those projects behind. Thankfully, when I finally moved to Virginia, I found Arcadia, initially as a volunteer, and quickly very much identified with their mission and their understanding of like what they want to accomplish as a nonprofit, and kind of like my skills and my background fit really well into what they were hoping to do in our community as well. So to jump into a little bit about Arcadia, our mission as a nonprofit is to cultivate a vibrant local food system that prioritizes health, equity, and sustainability from our farm forward. We are located on the Woodlawn Plantation, which is right at the intersection of the Richmond Highway and the George Washington Highway. And so right where the Jeff Todd is. I don't know if people are local or not, but we're kind of like in a very kind of like where the suburbs meet, strip mall area. And so it's a really kind of like unique space because we got suburbs all around us, but then we also have a lot of commercial, stores and restaurants and supermarkets and all this stuff. And we're just this like unique farm that works from an old, from one of George Washington's old estates, very close to kind of what Mount Vernon is still today. As an organization, we're focused on three kind of like main ideas: regenerative agriculture, meaning that all the techniques that we utilize to farm our food is focused on restoring the ecology of our soil, in hopes that way we provide our crops the best nutrients and the best minerals for these plants to grow healthy. And we do that through a bunch of different techniques. And our other kind of focus area is food access. We understand that, like most places in the world, and I'll use Guatemala as a background, but I see a lot of the same things happening here. There's kind of like two worlds, right? One where we have, the resources, the knowledge, and the easy access to healthy food. We know what to eat, we know where to buy it, and we have the ability to walk into a supermarket and kind of choose, and make healthy choices. And then there's other communities that, mostly due to poverty and lack of education, kind of miss out on those opportunities and either cannot access the food, cannot afford it, and sometimes a combination of both. And so some of our programs are focused on that, on trying to, bring healthy food out to those communities that desire it, but might not have an easy way of obtaining that food. And then finally, we do a lot of farm and nutrition education, which is basically, and then I'll talk a little bit more in detail, but educating from elementary school all the way to adults on where your food comes from, how to grow it in a sustainable manner, and how to connect to markets and other things, so that we can slowly start kind of like improving our local food system. And so all our work kind of breaks down into three programs. Our first one is our veteran training program. So we've kind of identified that veterans and farmers might have a few kind of like characteristics that match, right? They're hard workers, they're organized, and they're used to a lot of like hard physical work, which obviously farming requires. And so we have the veteran training program kind of has three different ways in which veterans can experience farming. The first one is the reserve program. So 1 weekend a month. 1 weekend a month for a year. They come out to the farm, or sometimes it's virtual and sometimes it's visiting local farms. But the idea is to learn everything about sustainable agriculture, learn about what opportunities there are there for grants, and how to purchase land, and what kind of benefits the USDA and veteran programs has for this specific type of population. The second option is they can become fellows at the farm. And that means that for a full growing season, they can come to our farm and be a paid employee. And I think this is a great opportunity, because I think a lot of people also kind of like glorify this idea of being a farmer, right? You want to be, live off the land and, work with your hands, but, you got to spend a summer outside in Virginia, from sunrise to sundown in that heat and humidity to kind of like prove to yourself that this is a lifestyle, right? Farming is not just a job, but a lifestyle. And so that program obviously likes to, is a full-on immersion into farming, and kind of proves to the participants that this is something that they want to engage in. And then the third option is we lease land on our property for them to kind of test out their business plan, and obviously benefit from our support, from our equipment, and it's a way for them to kind of reduce the risk of jumping into agriculture, and then they get to kind of experience and learn different ways to do that. And currently we have one of our veterans who has, I believe some of his background, one of his parents is from Thailand, and so he's identified certain crops that are very popular in Asian markets. And so he's focusing specifically on those crops, and has identified, Asian markets in like Arlington and other areas where he can distribute those crops. We have a group that's doing a seed saving program, and so they've identified certain crops that are that came with the African diaspora. So they brought those seeds over, and so it's like kind of like ancient varieties of chard or okra. And so they're trying to like grow those, harvest the seed, and then eventually, start selling some of the seed. And we've had all sorts of different, entrepreneurs out there kind of like testing out their ideas with the farming. And so that's our veteran program. And at the farm, we have about 4 acres of land that they operate in. most of that food that is grown there goes to our mobile markets. And so we've identified wards 7 and 8 in DC as being food deserts, which, if you're not familiar with the term, means just areas that don't have access to food. And so a lot of urban areas might see that, where supermarkets have maybe never opened up, or opened up at one time and have left. And so people don't have an easy access to food. Route 1, where we're located, is not the case. There's a lot of underserved populations, but there's plenty of supermarkets around. But these wards in 7 and 8, it's like, if you look at a map of supermarkets, there's literally no supermarkets in those 2 wards. And then there's liquor stores, dollar stores, and 7-Elevens. And so if people want to access food, their options for healthy food are, kind of like bananas and maybe some oranges, and then everything else is processed food that's, definitely not a healthy choice. And so our mobile markets go out 4 to 5 days a week, starting in May all the way out through December. And we do a one-stop shop. And so we source from our farm, mostly fresh produce, high quality, all, we're not certified, but it's all naturally, organically grown. And then we source meat, dairy, eggs, honey, fruit from farms within 100 miles of like the DC area. And so people can come, they can use SNAP, WIC, and other DC food vouchers to consume food. And our hope with that program is that, we can demonstrate that these communities have the interest and the purchasing capacity, and hopefully one day we'll have a big supermarket open up and will no longer be needed, and we can move our mobile market to a different location where that's required. And then our third program is our farm education program, and this is mostly the program I lead, and this one's focused specifically on the Route 1 area, the Route 1 corridor. I'm not sure where everyone is from, but like so many places around the U.S., this is kind of like a tale of 2 cities. There's Richmond Highway. On one end, we have pretty affluent, upper middle class, mostly white communities. Then we have Richmond Highway, and then on the other end, we have a lot of recent Central American population, a lot of historically Black communities, a lot of African immigrants, and there's just like quite a bit of disparity between those 2 communities. And as a kind of like an anecdote, back in our countries, or in Guatemala specifically, where I'm from, if I want to eat, if I'm trying to save money and I'm trying to eat, and I'm trying to go to the supermarket or go to the local markets, buying fruit and produce and eggs and rice and beans is like a cheap way to do it. I can feed myself, and if I'm trying to save money, my options are the cheap options, right? And I think that's something that here, immediately upon arriving, I noticed that that's not the case. If I'm trying to save money, my food options are highly processed, fast food, just not the type of food that I want. And so I obviously migrated under very different circumstances, and I'm blessed for that. But I can see how people who've recently moved here and are culture shocked by everything they see, but then are also noticing that some of the way they probably ate back home is not the easy way, and then they're overwhelmed by the options of all this like very colorful, very shiny, very kind of like appetizing food that we all enjoy from time to time, but that obviously is not beneficial for our health. And so in a lot of these communities, we've noticed, and my wife is a pediatrician and works mostly serving these communities, that high rates of obesity amongst like children, which you don't see back home. Like you don't, these kids that migrated within like a couple of years have just like suddenly become obese, and it's happening with the children, with the moms, with the parents as well. They've obviously like a lot of these families work super long hours, sometimes have 2 to 3 jobs, work on the weekends. So this idea of like having a healthy work-life balance is difficult to obtain because they lack the time as well. And so as an organization, we kind of identified that these communities required a little extra help, and that there's a lot of most people that are in these communities come from agricultural backgrounds. They've either grew up farming, or their parents grew up farming, and even my parents weren't farmers back in Guatemala, but it was something that you still, even if you're in a city, you can see that someone's growing corn in their backyard, or most of the food that you're eating is grown in the outskirts of your city, and so it's still very present to you. And so my program is focused on working with schools, community centers, churches along Richmond Highway to try to promote urban agriculture. And so we work in schools. Some of the schools here have some amazing school gardens, like really robust programs with a lot of resources, and can really and what they need sometimes is the support of outside organizations or outside people, because obviously schools are overwhelmed, and teachers are already overworked, and so they need a little bit of support to kind of like maintain and enhance these programs. And so we come in and we kind of cater the needs of the school. Some schools need a lot of help from literally teaching children how to grow the food. Others might just need sometimes help weed whacking so that they can clean up the space and make it accessible for the students. And so we've designed our program to be very flexible, very flexible, so that as teachers need us, then we can come in and support. We also understand that like we might be able to. I think I have a great time engaging with students. Like I can make any kid try raw kale off of a plant. I'm very good at that. But at the end, it's not the child who goes to the store and buys the food, right? And so even though we might affect and have a positive impact on this child, we also have to work with the parents to try to get them to also, at the time of purchasing the food, making those healthy choices as well. And so we've also established community gardens at some of the community centers in the area, and we work with senior communities, we work with adults, we work with some of the staff at these centers are also members of these communities, and so we work in training them and bringing the food access to them. And the idea is like, I never talk about diets, I never talk about calories, I never bring up any of these subjects with students. My idea is that you have this repetitive exposure to food, to agriculture, to being outside, to working with your hands, to seeing. I think so much of the work we do, sometimes we kind of like do work and don't see the benefit of it. And gardening is one where like, you can sit there and watch how things grow and kind of reap the benefits of that work. And there's such a rewarding experience to that. And I love, bringing out a group and seeing a completely overgrown garden that doesn't look much like a garden, and then having 10, 12 people work for an hour, and by the end of that hour, we've transformed that space. And that is just like such a rewarding experience for people to see kind of like the gains of all their work. The other one we've identified as a great option for urban agriculture is churches. Churches tend to have a lot of space sometimes. They have a very engaged community that wants to participate, and churches tend to be not only where people come looking for faith and emotional support, but sometimes where they get their food from, where they make friends, where they do all this stuff. And so having a garden can also help encourage that type of community building. We have one church where we've been working now for the last couple of years. Initially, they became our recipients of a lot of our donations. So excess food that didn't sell in the markets, or we always kind of separate a little bit to do some of that outreach with our communities. We donate to this food pantry. Eventually talking there with the pastor, we were like, what else could we do, right? Like we're giving away the fish, but how could we teach them how to fish? And so they don't have a lot of space, but we decided to buy and Arcadia put in half the money for this, a greenhouse. And so we set up a greenhouse. We taught how to grow seedlings. And so during the summer, we grew tomato seedlings. We sold and gave away a bunch of the seedlings. This church also has a community kitchen. So they feed a lot of the homeless and underserved population in that area. And so for the fall and spring, we're growing a lot of cooking greens and salad greens in the greenhouse. And that food will then get harvested, brought into the kitchen and prepared and served to these communities. Yeah, like I said, the idea is to have that repetitive exposure. So kids can see us in the classroom, they can see us in the garden, they can see us in their cafeteria. When they go to their after school program at the community center, we'll also be there. When their parents go to church, we'll also be there. And the idea is that we want to be a supportive partner in the community, but we also just want people to kind of re-engage with gardening and with food and kind of just enjoy these things that are to some of us have kind of become a privilege, but it's part of having food sovereignty and a little bit of individual responsibility as well, of looking after yourself and kind of feeding yourself. And so a few other kind of projects we do is we have a beautiful educational garden at Arcadia. And so we host field trips from schools, we do university trips, we do church groups, we do corporate groups, we do a lot of volunteer groups as well. We have a summer camp for children between the ages of 6 and 11. And basically we're open doors. If people want to come out, we give them a tasting tour, and it's great. I love, whatever age you are. We had, I think 2 weeks ago, a group of DC lawyers who need to do some service hours that their large corporation kind of demands from them. And so, they're hard workers. We got them out there weeding in 90-degree temperatures and stuff. But at one point we take a break and I give them a tasting tour of the garden. And so I'm walking around and being smell this, taste this, rub this on, rub this in your fingers and smell it and taste it. And you can just see how, even kind of the same reaction I get from children, this awe of surprise and interest that, you expect from the children, because a lot of them don't have that exposure. But even a lot of adults just, we're busy with our daily lives and just don't get to see that. And we also try to grow some weird things here and there that really spark people's interest. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of the work Arcadia does. I feel like we could be 3 separate nonprofits, but we're one, and our hope, like I mentioned, is to have a positive impact on our food system and our local communities.
Can you tell us how you got started, and do you help other groups to create Arcadias?
So how Arcadia got started, or how I got started?
Well, Arcadia, the structure of such a good thing.
Right. So the story is Michael Babin, who is a local restaurateur. He owns Neighborhood Restaurant Group, which owns, I think pre-pandemic, around 17 restaurants in the DMV area. He's, I think it was 14 years ago, was oh, I want to get local food for my restaurants. And restaurants tend to pay top dollar for food. And he was I can't find this. Where do I source local food? Most of the vendors that sell to restaurants, are bringing, lettuce from California or tomatoes from, different parts of the country. And he's like, where are all the local producers? And so that kind of like, led him to think, well, if we're paying top dollar and we can't find this food, then like just regular folks can't, are not definitely not affording this food and can't find this food. And that kind of like snowballed him into looking into our food system and understanding and realizing that, well, there's these like communities that need to access healthier food and local produce. And so initially we started as an organization growing food for the restaurants, and that as a way to kind of like the restaurants would buy the food from us, and that was a way for us to kind of like gain some income to run the organization. Over time we've kind of like distanced ourselves more completely from that model. We don't, occasionally we'll have one of the restaurant chefs reach out if they're looking for something unique, or if they want to come forage around the farm or something. But over time we've kind of left that model, and we focus now more on like grant writing and fundraising and other ways.
Can you say some more about regenerative agriculture? It's used so easily, but and I understand the purpose of it, but how you actually do it would be very interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically the idea is, and this has been over the last maybe like 5 or 10 years kind of been scientifically kind of proven of there's an entire ecosystem under the soil, right? There's all sorts of bacteria and fungus that are breaking down organic matter and then releasing these nutrients to make them available for plants. And so conventional agriculture or industrial agriculture, what that does is that you purchase your agrochemicals and then you put them into your soil, and your plants can utilize them. But in that process, you're also killing a lot of the organisms that live in your soil. You're killing a lot of weeds and plants that might be the homes of other microorganisms. And obviously, over time, you're just like disrupting the entire ecology of a space. And so with regenerative agriculture is like, it's trying to kind of like understand nature and work with it rather than kind of like against it. And so some of the techniques we practice are, for example, cover crops. And these are certain varieties of plants like buckwheat, crimson clover, rye, peas, and then depending on the time of year, some will grow better than others. But the whole purpose of those is, if I grew corn, for example, on a field, and at the end of the summer I harvest all my corn, usually most farmers, or back in the day, would just leave their fields bare till the next season where they could start planting again. And what that does is that through rain and erosion and wind, that topsoil gets washed away or blown away, and then we have like I think I'm saying this correctly, desertification, where like the soil dries up, it kind of like kills out all the like microorganisms in your soil. And so then next year when you want to recrop, you have to first till your soil very heavily, which also disrupts the ecosystem in the soil. Sometimes it might unearth seeds from weeds that are buried into the soil and bring them up to the surface. And instead with cover crop is you're protecting your soils, their ability to hold moisture is higher. With cover crops, they're able to, as the roots of these plants kind of break down, they're feeding the ecosystem under the soil. A lot of these are also flowering plants. And so, crimson clover is going to be one of the first to flower in the spring. And so it helps feed all the pollinators in your ecosystem. And then once you're ready to grow stuff in there, you can just mow it down, lightly till it back into the soil, and you're adding high nitrogen plants back into the soil. And so that's one technique that we we use very regularly. And if you drive by our farm in the winter, it still looks green, right? None of the fields are exposed. Everything is covered with organic matter from these plants. Another one is we compost everything that comes out of our fields, every plant, not our weeds, but every part of organic matter gets composted, and then that compost we can reapply back into our soil. And obviously compost has, is high on nutrients, high on microorganisms, helps retain soil, helps build soil structure. So it has many benefits to agriculture. And it's kind of like a loop system, right? We grow the plant, we take the plant, we turn it into compost, and then we utilize it to feed our soil the next year. And then, it's just like a circular cycle of how to reutilize all that organic matter. Then we do things like I mentioned, the minimal or no-till is one that a lot of farms are practicing, and that one was probably the hardest one to kind of like understand, because you're like, how am I not gonna till and break up the soil? Like, how am I? And it's something that over time you can't go from like tilling your soil to not tilling the next year. It's something that you have to do over time and kind of like build your soil fertility to be able to practice that. But the idea is that you don't want to break that structure, that mycelium or fungus that's growing in your soil, and so you're not tilling it very deeply. And another thing we do, for example, is solarizing our fields. And so rather than using herbicides, we can just use these like specific like black tarp that we can cover a field with, and especially with the heat in this area, you can do that for 2 weeks and it'll just like kill all the weeds, and then we can remove that, add compost, and directly plant into it. So those are kind of like a couple of like regenerative agricultural techniques that we use. Crop rotation is another one, and if you're a monoculture, that's all you grow, right? Every year you're going to grow the same thing. Our farm is a diverse ecosystem. We grow, 40 different varieties of plants, herbs, flowers, and that are in constant rotation. And so we also have at our educational garden, which is the one I manage, we don't use any sort of like chemical input, not even stuff that's like organically certified, because we've created an ecosystem that balances each other out. And so there's bugs that eat the bugs that eat my plants. And so, I'm happy to share a little bit, and nothing gets like overwhelmed, and there's just kind of like a natural balance, just from incorporating flowers and incorporating herbs and kind of like rotating your plants through a cycle. So those are some of the techniques.
When you come to the end of a growing chard or corn or whatever, what do you do right then? When it's the end of that crop?
Yeah, so usually one of the things we do is we don't pull the plant out completely, because we want the root system to decompose and break down in the soil, right? We want that to continue to feed the microorganisms. So we usually come and cut things right below the surface. All that organic matter that we pull out will get broken down and composted. And depending on the season, then we might broad fork our soil, which is it kind of looks like a 4-prong trident, and it doesn't till the soil, but it like makes kind of like deep cuts into the soil to aerate it and like loosen it up a little bit, and obviously disrupts a little bit of the ecosystem, but not, we're not flipping the soil over. Then we would apply new compost and fertilizer up on the soil, and we can, either plant our new crop or give the soil a break and plant some cover crop on it. And so a lot of our fields right now that we're kind of like ending the summer and starting the fall, most of them are going into winter and fall cover crop. and they'll be, kind of dormant, but fed throughout the season till the spring, where we can start growing food again.
Well,
Or-
Juan
Scary.
Pablo, we've enjoyed your time. Are there any follow-up or final questions? I don't think we need to keep you all night long.
It's been wonderful. Thank you.
It
Thank
certainly
you.
has.
Thank you very much
Thank
for having me.
Okay, well, we're gonna say goodnight then. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
No, thank you. You too.
You too.